everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a lot of excitement and breathlessness over the latest Kimi K3 release of an AI frontier open weight model from the Chinese, from Moonshot AI. And does that mean that the Chinese are ultimately going to be more successful than the United States and the U.S. companies in their AI developments? Nobody knows, but certainly they are very close. I mean, this is now competitive with Anthropic. It's competitive with OpenAI, and they're doing it without the most advanced chips from the United States. And I indeed have heard from a number of policy types, some in government, some formerly in government, who had been arguing very strongly for cutting off semiconductors to the Chinese, now saying, you know what, that didn't work. Didn't work in the sense that they're able to focus. There's nothing like shutting down your competitor in getting them. I mean, unless you can really, as they say, you come at the king, you best not miss. If you get them to spend a lot more money and do everything possible to ensure that they can develop their own capabilities without your help, then you end up with a much stronger competitor that isn't dependent on you. And I mean, I would argue that it's U.S.-Chinese interdependence that creates some level of mutually assured economic destruction, leaving aside the nuclear capabilities and the military capabilities. But China is principally a commercial power, becoming a commercial superpower, and certainly they are. If there's such a thing as a technological superpower, they are one. And the United States is the other. We can clearly say that today. And that in that environment, you're less likely to fight if there's a level of interdependence. But where we are today is a move towards greater decoupling and in a race among AI companies, both inside the United States, but also in China and with each other. And as fast as humanly possible. I think the Americans would be doing this irrespective of whether the Chinese were in the race, but it's useful for U.S. companies to be able to point to China as an adversary to say, here's why you can't slow us down, you can't regulate us, because we've got to make sure that we beat these guys. The interesting thing, of course, is that most recently, luminaries among AI leadership in the hyperscalers, Demis Hassabis, who had been the founder of DeepMind, Dario Amodei, who leads Anthropic, have been calling for much more regulation because they are concerned about where these models are going and their ability to do damage. We are not close to capacity to effectively regulate these models right now. The dangers, as the AI developers see it today, and we've already had this come out, and this was the Fable challenge and the Mythos challenge, is identifying cyber vulnerabilities that otherwise hackers would not be able to identify, at least not as easily, immediately, and at scale. That was why the Americans said you had to immediately withdraw Mythos from the market. I know they said it was for foreigners, but in reality, export control was the only regulatory means that the U.S. had. They intended Anthropic to pull it completely for the Americans as well. And they did. But that is a risk now, and it's a risk now with the American models, and not just with Anthropic's, but with OpenAI's, and assuredly with Moonshot AI from China as well. And it means that anyone with anything that has software running on it, it has vulnerabilities that can be exploited by people, institutions, and governments with these AI tools. That's today. Within about 6 months, the fear is that is going to extend to the creation of bioweapons. And so, yeah, you need to put all sorts of fencing and limitations on use of those AI models, but you also have to have the ability to track the people that are actually using them, track the tokens that are being spent, ensure that you know your customer, you know your agent, because if there isn't some level of deterrence, you're going to have the creation and spread of bioweapons in very, very short order. And then within another 6, 12 months, so 12 to 18 months from now, then you start to have bigger issues around alignment of AI models, inability to control alignment, potential for what they call RSI, recursive self-improvement of those models. In other words, these are risks that are greater than pretty much anything that we see in the global space other than nuclear weapons. And within a few years, probably including nuclear weapons. And yet, we're moving as fast as humanly possible, because if we don't, others will. That is the argument used by both CEOs trying to beat their competitors in the US marketplace and also against the Chinese, that there's an inevitability. Some think it's the desirable end state to create things that are smarter than humans. Some think it is an inevitable end state that can't be stopped, and you might as well dance while the fiddle is playing. But in any case, at some existential level, these are kind of insane things to talk about, absent some level of real governance, absent a U.S. governance model, and frankly, a global governance model. And I think there are two things that are worth considering here. The first is that in some ways, it's probably inevitable that the United States is going to look more like China in the way it deals with AI. And what I mean by that is all the talk about increasing industrial policy and the American government taking equity stakes in strategically important industries, that if AI companies are seen to reflect a core national security vulnerability and advantage by the US government, then yes, there will be an intrinsic kill switch that will stop other countries and other actors from having access to it. And yes, the US government will demand some level of direct influence and control over them. I don't think we're there yet, but that seems to be where we're heading. That's the first point. The second point, I liked quite a bit Hassabis's point last week about some sort of FINRA, financial institution type licensing to ensure that there are independent technical regulators that can look at these models as they're being developed. I think we're going to need more than that, but I do think that the financial marketplace is the appropriate analogy. And the reason I say that is because we all have access to the financial markets. They're structurally essential for the functioning of our societies, of our economies, and of our governments. And we have nominally to truly independent central bank governors in the US, the Fed, in Europe, the ECB, in China, the People's Bank, but they're all technocratic and they all want the markets to continue to function. They try to identify any threat, which could come from anywhere, and contain that threat, communicate it, and do everything they can with fiscal, monetary, and other tools to ensure that we don't suddenly have a marketplace that is broken, that we don't throw the world economy into a Great Depression. And we saw that work after the financial crisis, that the Americans, the Europeans, the Brits, the Japanese, the Chinese, doesn't matter if you are an authoritarian government or democratic, doesn't matter if you had a state capitalist economy or a private sector captured economy or well-regulated free market, all of those central bank governors work together to help ensure that the markets still function. That's what we probably need for AI. You need to ensure that any threat that comes from a model that is created by the Americans or the Chinese that suddenly is being used in a way that can actually existentially threaten critical infrastructure, a civilian population, a government's national security, the marketplace, any such threat. So it's much more holistic and integrated than even dealing with the financial markets. But any such threat has to be identified, has to be communicated, and has to be contained. And it's inadequate to do that only in the United States or only with the US and allies. You have to do that globally because the technology is globally. When I look at so many of the new AI companies that are raising money and are super entrepreneurial and cutting edge in the United States, so many of them are using Chinese AI models because they're good enough. Soon they might even be better, but they're also much cheaper. And if you're a new AI company, you don't have money to burn. You're not Meta, you're not Google, you're not Microsoft. You've got to actually be very concerned about what kind of tokens your programmers, your coders, your agents are actually using. Coming from China, you're going to have, anything that we do, even if there are a whole bunch of national security concerns that are only focused on individual countries, the ability to ultimately identify threats and communicate them and contain them cannot be just the US. It can't just be the tech companies and the US government. It can't just be the tech companies, the US government, and allies. It's going to have to be everyone. And that's true whether the Chinese have the top models in the world or whether theirs are aspirationally top and always a few months behind. And we don't know which of those is actually the case. But from a risk mitigation perspective, it does not matter. And it's much more challenging than dealing with the nuclear threat, though at least dealing with the nuclear threat showed us that despite the fact that the Americans and the Soviets mistrusted each other, in many ways wanted to defeat the other system, but did not want to destroy the planet in doing so. And therefore, we were able to create some guardrails, some communications, some limitations on nuclear development that helped us avoid destruction. And that historic reality is something we are going to need to build on very seriously as AI models become existentially empowering for humanity and an existential threat to all of us as well. That's it for me, and I will talk to you all real soon.